I think we're live right now. Welcome everyone to this Web3 Talk session where we're going to be discussing DAOs and decentralized governance. I'm super excited about this particular session. I'm here with a lot of great people and guests, so very happy to have you all here. Just to give you a few instructions on how this works, we are a lot of people today. So if you have a question, please, there is a button that says on the bottom of Crowdcast, ask a question. You can add your question there. We're going to go through the discussion for about 45, 50 minutes, and then we're going to open the questions from the community for about 10 to 15 minutes. My name is Raul. I am a council member for Kusama and Polkadot on-chain consoles. And I'm here today with Betty, who's joining us from Auckland, New Zealand. So thank you, Betty. We know it's late there. Betty is a co-founder of Akala and Karura. Karura was the first parachain to connect to Kusama network relay chain via auctions mechanism. And it's a scalable EVM compatible chain that's optimized for DeFi use cases. Welcome, Betty. Elliot is also joining us from Paris, France. He's the co-founder and director of the Governance Research Institute and a chief blockchain officer at Nodl. Nodl is building a decentralized wireless network to power IoT connectivity with Substrate framework. So very excited about that. And from New York, we have Dylan Chen. Dylan is the CEO and the co-founder of Commonwealth Labs and also a council member of Edgeware. Commonwealth is an all-in-one platform for on-chain communities to discuss, vote, and propose projects. He's also an alumni of Pennsylvania University Wharton. Super glad to have you here, guys. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having
us.
Thanks
for having us.
No problem. Just to give a quick intro on how we're going to do this, the discussion is going to be pretty general. We're going to focus on mainly non-technical matters. Of course, if you want to ask a more technical question, you can add your question to the Crowdcast box. To give an intro on what DAOs or decentralized autonomous organizations are, for those who do not know or not really aware about it, in general terms, you could say that DAOs are digital organizations, right? With encoded rules that aim for collective management and coordination. So we could say that they are operating systems that allow us to ensure open collaboration. And they have two elements that are very essential to its functioning. One is governance. The governance design of DAOs allows a set of rules for coordination. And also the community, right? The community, it's a big, big part of DAOs. Without communities, DAOs wouldn't exist, either on-chain and off-chain. And it's interesting to think about the dynamics of off-chain and on-chain interaction in DAOs as well. We've seen in the last few years a great development on decentralized autonomous organizations, from enhancing private wealth to enhancing or improving the funding and the financing for collective wealth and public goods, like we're seeing with the Kusama and the Polkadot on-chain treasuries, for example. So I'd like to jump right in on the first essential element of DAOs, which is governance, right? Which I think all of you are very much involved in. And I'd like to start with a general question, and more specifically to Elliot, because of his role in the Research Institute. What changes do you guys see for the enhancement of DAOs in the governance design? And specifically, what voting models are you seeing and have you seen in the past? And how do you think these voting models would improve representation of DAOs? Elliot, you want to start?
Sure. If we look at the past year or so, I would say at the beginning of that year, most voting models were mostly what we call direct coin voting, meaning that you would have a very simple structure, a simple visual interface, and people just use their token holdings to vote on different proposals, and votes will be weighted by the amount of tokens everyone owns. And in most cases, those tokens will actually be locked for a few days, so as a proposal gets through or not. It seems like though over the past few months, we've been kind of moving to more complex structures. One of them being governance with multiple structures. If we look at Polkadot and Kusama, Raul, you are council member, you know that better than anyone. Dylan, you know that as well because you're council member. Okay, you probably know that as well. We have in Prague, we have a democracy part, and then we have a council that can submit referendums, probably veto proposals as well. And it seems like more and more projects are switching to that kind of multiple structure governance systems where you can ensure maximum decentralization, but still have a small committee of people, not necessarily influencing, but still sometimes maybe controlling or purging bad proposals from the actual organization. As the other evolution, I kind of want to go through because that's what's personally is more interesting to me. It seems like we are moving towards other forms of voting systems or accounting system for votes. Some of them being conviction voting, where we incentivize people to show conviction in different proposals. Polkadot's implementation in that case, I believe, is more centered around the fact that you can lock your tokens for a longer time as a way to show more conviction for a proposal, as a way to acquire more power and to then influence proposals. But then, when we look into the next few months, we can start thinking of more innovative voting models. So we have people have been experimenting with quadratic voting. We have probably zero knowledge proof at some point is going to play a role here. And more and more models are going to be put in place. And the last one, hand over the mic to whoever picks it up next, would be that we're increasingly moving towards off-chain voting as well. Not necessarily in the Polkadot ecosystem, but if we look at in the Ethereum ecosystem, more and more organizations are using a tool called Snapshot, and Snapshot is a way to handle what's called optimistic voting, meaning that votes and proposals are debated first off-chain, then they're committed on-chain, and usually either a new vote happen or we can go through a decentralized court system to decide whether a proposal needs to be executed or not.
Betty and Dylan, you are very much involved in the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystem, and your own projects as well have governance models in place. What have been the challenges when setting up governance designs for your own organizations? What are the benefits of it, and how are they implemented in particular? Betty, you would like to start?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think the biggest thing about governance in general, I think, is education, because it is a very easily misconcepted idea of how you should govern. For example, everybody should have one vote by birthright, and one vote counts as one vote, and you should just vote on any issue. But I think there's actually quite a famous piece on democracy or governance by Socrates. Folks who actually thought about this matter thousands of years ago is like, the generally perceived democracy, what I just described, was actually a really bad idea. Because, in the history, people, would you actually like folks who actually open bookshops to actually determine where a warship should go to war, and then which direction it should go and how they should weather the storm? That was what he was, conceiving and kind of debating. Quite a bad idea to let sort of folks who do not have a common knowledge voting and even making decisions on an area that requires a lot of expertise. And in probably more recent events, there are referendums that happen actually move a country, shifting their direction completely, and then afterwards, the countries, the people in that country start Googling what was the matter that they are voting about, right? I was particularly referring to the Brexit event. So those are probably areas that's mostly, I guess, got a blind spot. So in my experience in, running Acala, there's a lots of information there for us to actually, educate ourselves, but also educate of our community to learn about what is the best way, to govern. And what is also the most efficient way to govern? Because while you want everyone to be involved, that's engaging the community, and then most important thing there is to actually hear different perspectives. And then on the other side, you also want experts to actually help you to make those decisions. So I'll give a very specific example here for Acala, because Acala is focused on decentralized finance. So in addition to running a blockchain, so there's lots of technical expertise required to understand what the runtime is about, whether there's issues running the blockchain itself. That's one side of it. On the other side, there's decentralized finance, like risk management, understanding the economic dynamics. So those are very expertise areas. So we have involved, I think earlier alluded to multi-level sort of governance structure. So we have different councils to manage different jurisdictions. We have a general council to manage the overall blockchain operation, but we also have specialized council like financial council to manage the financial risk parameter. For example, if we need to increase stability fee or interest rate or collateralization ratio, we can go through councils like that, and also involve in external parties like Ganglet Network, who specialize in risk assessment to provide those recommendations. And those things obviously is done both on-chain and off-chain. The education, information part of it, mostly done off-chain, and then the discussion are mostly done off-chain, but the voting is mostly on-chain. I think with the setup of the council to guide the direction of voting, and then plus a democracy, which is like when you require a referendum, everyone is participating in voting for or against the motion or the proposal. The two are actually balance itself out to have a more balanced decision-making process. But none of what I said was perfect also. So just like watch and learn and continue to improve. So, yeah.
Of course. Dylan, you're also a council member on Edgeware, and Betty mentioned that they have several councils for different topics. And Elliot also mentioned different voting models, right? And sometimes these voting models or these voting designs are used as check and balances for the different governing mechanisms and the different governing bodies in the DAO. My question for you is, what were the challenges that you guys found when implementing the governance design, and how did you choose to go on the way you went through? And how do you, in general terms, avoid, for example, for councils to take over control particular organizations?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And maybe I can even preface a little bit on kind of like the history of Edgeware and how that kind of has kind of been running. So, one of the first projects at Commonwealth Labs was to spin up Edgeware. And so Edgeware is a proof of stake, or I guess it'll be soon a parachain within the Polkadot ecosystem. And so one thing that we initially did to launch the network was to do something called a lock drop. And also, you can call it a signal drop, essentially, where you just said, okay, I have this amount of coins in my wallet, ETH specifically, and therefore I'd like to signal and claim some Edgeware tokens. And so we bootstrapped with this wide kind of coin holder base. And so that's been interesting to see. The network launched early 2019, 2020. And so it's been an interesting experiment to continue to see that run. When Edgeware first launched, I think the whole mentality was to be experimental and be fast. And so we launched with the core governance modules, as well as the multi-sig palette as well. And so I think the governance structure has largely followed from that, which has been pretty cool to see. One thing to note is that there's a lot of things that just evolve based on who is within the community. And so, for example, there are cases in which substrate palettes themselves, you can have different types of convictions on certain votes. And so if something starts in the council, ostensibly it's been passed by a group of experts, to borrow Betty's terms. And then it can go to, if everyone unanimously agrees, or based on whatever parameter, it could be a supermajority, can then pass into referenda. And so only a straight majority could vote. The other way around, if it's just been proposed by the general public, so to speak, you can have kind of a negative or positive turnout bias, essentially. And so if only 5% of voters are participating, and some minimum quorum threshold has been reached, you might need 90% of voters to turn out to the affirmative to get something to pass. What we've kind of seen with Edgeware has been largely arisen from our results of the community. And so, of course, like, rules evolve based on social norms. A lot of parliamentary rules within the UK or the US, there's standards that arise. So what we've seen for Edgeware is a movement away from the council actually proposing votes and only them coming from referenda. There's been a recent proposal actually just to have all votes be simple majority voting. That's been quite an interesting thing. I think the primitives that are built into the Polkadot ecosystem right now within the palettes themselves do tend to favor those with like larger stakes or those with the ability to garner large delegations, which is another feature in the space. And then more specifically on Edgeware, we've seen kind of the outgrowth of organic, not hard-coded councils, but rather multi-sigs themselves. And so the comp in the Ethereum ecosystem is to have people run Gnosis safes for certain functions. And so we've kind of followed that model. And so I believe there's around 5 active multi-sigs. The Edgeware Agency, Commonwealth Labs has one, BuildDAO, Decent Partners, just to name a few. And they all have been granted a certain amount from the Treasury itself after a rigorous review process by the community. And then they have to execute on this kind of like plan. And it's been interesting to see kind of this organic development, even outside of the formal governance structures that have been put in place. One problem that I think we always do see is what Betty had mentioned, is the kind of education piece on all this stuff. It's tough to get all your information in one single place. It's tough to even get a sentiment to see if something will pass. There's a lot of friction that can be kind of brought up by anyone who wants to put something forward, just for the fear or the uncertainty of like, okay, what is this feeling? How do I need to adjust this? And so based on that experience, we actually launched this tool. Raul, thank you for the illustrious introduction mentioning Commonwealth. We bootstrapped this as a part of Edgeware, where you're login essentially. You don't actually have to log in to see all the information that's on the site, but it's tied to an address. And so based on that gives you a few sources of information. You can first see, of course, the person's coin holding, their past voting history, and of course, that's all tied to essentially the discussions that happen as well. And then, from there, we can go into optimistic voting, whether it's just, purely off-chain and one person, one vote, or it can be, coin weighted. And then that kind of helps alleviate a lot of this painful uncertainty around getting a proposal passed or just seeing what the state of a proposal is. So that's where we've largely been focused now, is really that experience around the social infrastructure around, governance and DAOs.
That's very cool. A lot of mentioning on education and community involvement. A big topic, it's always for DAOs, the question of participation, right, and involvement of the communities. So I want to touch and start with that on the second essential element of DAOs, which is the community per se, right? And I want to start with Elliot and ask, what has been your experience when researching about participation and DAOs? Are DAOs here to solve the representation problem? Are DAOs here to increase the involvement of the community? What's needed there to increase this participation, and how do you see it?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, right? Because when we launched the GRI, Governance Research Institute, with my co-founder, what we did is that we found a website that lists all DAOs. Ethereum-based DAOs, but back in the times, things were what they were. And when we looked at the percentage of active voters versus token holders of those projects, gotta admit, the numbers were pretty disappointing. The biggest DAOs, if you look at them, they have probably 100, few thousand monthly active voters, which like it's a month, it should be more, especially for projects with like millions of dollars of market cap, probably millions of token holders. It seems like there is only a very small percentage of people contributing to the actual governance processes. It's certainly improving, like, I think we can all admit to that, but, it seems like this community is like playing such a small part yet. We do have projects like DAO Stack that is thinking of using reputation to weight votes, which can I go back to the first question? But maybe one idea would be, and that's what we are doing, I believe, would be to just reward reputation to more active participants choosing, and I guess becomes a tricky question. But maybe we could reward reputation to voters choosing proposals, like the correct votes, basically, with the caveat that do we actually want to do that? There could be some issues here, but we can think of many ways to incentivize the community. We can think of what about we do liquidity mining these days. Who wants to do governance mining or reputation mining? We could do it. We could incentivize these guys. But I do think that a DAO, especially if we look at projects like our projects, let's look at us. Our DAOs are supposed to represent our community, to have the best interest of our community at heart. Yet, only a few of us participate in them, and we have to admit it's it's the deepest pockets. And so it may, maybe there's. It can be two very different worlds. We need like smaller token holders to participate. We need more active community people to come and participate. But then again, we're in crypto. Do we actually want everyone to participate? You know what I mean? We may have trolls, common crypto community issues, and we may need a good way to filter those. Can think maybe reputation again could be interesting.
Betty, Dylan, what is your opinion on the use of on-chain reputations? I think that what Substrate Frameworks allows you to do is to gradually decentralize, right? We see like this development of the chains, decentralizing gradually. Is your team or your community discussing new mechanisms to increase participation and involvement? Is on-chain reputation something that you guys have thought about? What is your perspective on this?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to steal the mic. Cool. I think so. I think all the panelists probably agree that on-chain reputation is certainly something that is going to play an increasingly important role in the coming years. Of course, we recognize expertise in every phase of life, whether it's a certificate, even a sticker, amount of followers that a person has. All these things can be little dimensions of reputation. So it's a really highly dimensional space, and it's just making sure that we can pick and choose what the right kind of elements are. One thing that I think the Edgework community has always been interested in is leveraging the kind of, so to speak, identities palette more broadly within the ecosystem. And so what that looks like in the Edgework case might be something where, okay, you have to attest to holding a Twitter handle, whether it's pseudonymous or real name, and associating that with an Edgework address or Substrate address more broadly to be able to participate in governance. One of the pitfalls, I guess it depends on who you talk to, is the ability to have multiple addresses, and so to be not Sybil resistant in some cases. And so certainly having something where you have multiple accounts, and then you can do some QV, quadratic voting, which increases or decreases your voting power based on the amount of coins that you hold within your wallet. That's one to think about. I think there's just more broadly a lot of interesting experience already happening in the ETH space. And so Elliot kind of had referred to governance mining. I think one DAO that we've seen work on actually distributing tokens to already participating voters has been within the Gnosis ecosystem, if I recall. But we've seen a lot of people drop tokens to new projects, essentially, based on past participation. Whether it's ArcX.money allowing people to participate in the new protocol based on their past DeFi participation or rabbit hole doing these quests. All these things are things that we can certainly take and allow to happen in the kind of like substrate ecosystem. Last small point, outside of just reputation, I think like we've definitely been focused around kind of project governance, but one of the things in general that DAOs are interesting for in terms of use cases is that they kind of like blur the lines between work and play. And so you can spin up a DAO. It could be a thing that disappears in 1 week in the sense that you're trying to bid on an NFT. And certainly there we've seen an explosion within the Polkadot ecosystem, Polkadot and Kusama ecosystem. Or it can be something as quote unquote hardcore as running a whole chain, which really involves so many different stakeholders. And so just being mindful that it really is this whole spectrum of different use cases that we're already starting to see and hope to see in the future.
Betty, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to add to that from a different angle, because the whole point of governance is politics, right? Basically, socialized decision making. I think we have to be careful not to make this whole thing a popularity kind of contest, because we only need to look outside of crypto, like in real life, how messed up the whole world is in terms of decision making. We have to learn a lot of lessons from it. Even just drawing from existing sort of voting systems. Generally, well, I see someone mentioned in the chat, about in America, how you actually vote, the parliaments, etc. But a lot of the voting system has been there for hundreds of years and hasn't been changed at all. In particular, that sort of voting system, you can already see a deadlock that it turned our society into is two parties, right? Doesn't matter who you vote, because one vote, you can only vote for one party. So eventually, if you vote for the third party out there who has a voice, represents you, you're wasting your vote, right? Because that's why now it converges to two-party sort of system. And also the point of decision making, why we even vote? Why don't we just get the smartest person to actually just detect, right? That also work in some countries, but the whole point is you want a more balanced decision-making process, and also taking perspectives from different parts of, the people or community that you're representing, right? Because just because a minority have fewer voices, like disabled communities or people who have special needs, doesn't mean they shouldn't have a voice, right? So that's why, the very, very crude voting system, just one vote for one party is going to turn out to be where we are today. However, I live in a country called New Zealand. I think a few years ago, a long time ago, we used the same system, and it's always the two parties govern the entire country. And then a number of years ago, we changed this system that allow multiple parties. And then this idea is called something like approval voting. So you can vote for more than one party. So you don't waste your vote. So for example, in New Zealand, there are 5 or 6 or 7 parties. I can vote for a leading party that could take the lead of the government, but I could also vote for other parties that represent my other interests. For example, Green Party for sustainability, or some other aspects, look after the community that I am mostly passionate about. And you will realize, as a DeFi builder, I'm not governance expertise, but at the same time, when building on top of Substrate or Polkadot, there's already a whole bunch of research has been done at a very fundamental level. And the stuff that I just talked about used in New Zealand is somewhat already implemented on the blockchain, used by both Kusama and Polkadot voting. And I can actually vote for more than one councillors, right? And then this system is actually a framework. It's like a template. Any of us here, the projects can actually take those templates and then kind of like customize it to actually suit our particular community. I think that's like super advanced. I don't think, you know, anyone out there is actually, unless you are just like, you know, governance researcher or expertise in the area, that you're going to reinvent the whole system. This actually consolidates lots of intelligence in there. So I think this certainly will accelerate the adoption and also education of how to govern more efficiently, and also be more representative is very, very important. Get people's voice heard is very important in a smart way. So yeah, so that's my input.
It's interesting you mentioned balance, right? Because depending to who you ask, there are different definitions of what balance is and is supposed to be. And I can't stop thinking about your experience with Karura and the crowd loans auctions, the crowd loans pilot. And I was wondering if you have any insights on how the crowd loans pilot and then the token distribution that resulted from this crowd loan affected Karura in the governance design particularly, right? How do you see that in your own project?
Yeah, so very early on, we kind of view crowd loan as a token distribution and community bootstrap event. For a number of reasons, you know, I think the sort of incentive design there is to keep everybody accountable in that loop. Basically, the project, obviously, because in an ICO, traditionally, the project is not kept accountable. You are only accountable for raising the funds, but not quite delivering them. So the crowd loan structure is basically, you know, the project doesn't touch the fund, but it get an opportunity. Once there are enough people support you, you can launch your project and prove yourself, basically. So through that process, all the supporters actually, you know, kind of like vote for you, and then lock in their funds to support you for a period of time. So they are already long-term commitments. They are already ecosystem participants. And then for the project, you know, we are kind of incentivized to actually deliver. And if we do deliver, all of the participants will benefit. And at the same time, you know, Polkadot ecosystem will benefit. And all your fellows who also launched will benefit. So that gives you a kind of like a trickle up effect. And then through that process in Karura in particular, we had about 500,000 KSM being locked. Part of the reason is, I think, it's the first one, right? So everyone is like excited, everyone's trying their hands. But you can actually see after Karura launched, you know, the curve actually goes down. I think in the second round, third round, it probably goes back to the market equilibrium of, you know, people kind of become more rational, I guess, when they're voting. But at the same time, it also become a very good bootstrap event because we had about 20,000 unique account participated in the event. To our surprise, majority of them, I think 85 or maybe more, is like individuals. Very few actually coming from exchanges, basically pooled participants. And then you can imagine those 80% of the people that use Polkadot.js, they use a wallet to participate, which automatically turn themselves into you know, a user of our network once we launch. So when we launched Karura live a month ago, we started with like you know, close to 60,000 account holders to be on the chain. Not to say that our voting turnout rate is very high. We do have incidents where everyone thought the proposal is going to pass, and then thought everybody else is going to vote, and then it turned out to be not the case, right? So yeah, so we did have incidents like that, and then incidents like that become usually a very good example of showing people, you know, the power is in your hands, right? Don't think you got the power and everybody else will just exercise that power on behalf of you. If you don't voice your what you want and also your opinion, you know, things could turn a different way. So that become, you know, quite a lesson learned in our community. That was a low risk proposal. So as a core dev team, we didn't even put in our vote. We just like watch and see what happened overnight. And then it's very low turnout, to be honest. And then there's one guy who actually tried this new thing is using weighted voting. So he basically lock in his vote, and then so have more voting power. There's nothing, malicious or attacking of that usage. I think he just want to try his hands to see how powerful he can be. And then because of the other side, and people, didn't actually turn up to vote. And then this becomes like an example in our community. Like it actually, spread a lot of discussion in our discussion groups, and people like become, self-aware. That they're responsible, and people and right after that, every time there's a governance proposal, folks actually quite alert. Is this something related to me? Is it gonna change the direction of where the interest rate is gonna go or whatever? So I think it's a process and evolution as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about how you harmonize the off-chain community, right? So the discussion on the proposal and the debate and the proposal per se, and then the on-chain part, right? The on-chain community voting for it. Elliot, how do you think this can be harmonized? And Dylan, also, what is your experience in your project as a forum that allows communities to discuss and propose and vote? Does the off-chain community discussion translates into the on-chain structure or not?
Yeah, good question. I think Dylan will have like a very, very interesting point of view. I can add to that. Will be if we look at Snapshot Labs, optimistic voting, those kind of structures, it kind of translates in let's take the example of a snapshot proposal. It got votes off chain, people sign with their keys, there's a Merkle tree, there's all those kind of things. Once that process is reached, there's a proposal being created on chain. When we look at that proposal, it is supposed to kind of reflect what happened off chain already, meaning that if we were to do a vote again on chain, we should reach approximately the same results. Caveats, not everybody's going to vote. There are fees to pay, extra. But technically, it should be very similar to what was agreed upon. And we can think to kind of go back to your question. If we think about if we have all these discussions in off-chain manner, at the end of the discussion, we'll just open a forum like Dylan's Commonwealth platform. At the end of that forum, at the end of that discussion thread, we should have a good idea, technically, of what's going to happen. And then again, if we circle back to Betty, your experience with Karura, with the guy I think locking more votes. I think that's what you said. There's still a few things that we cannot necessarily estimate after an off-chain discussion. If we look at DeFi platforms, people have been borrowing tokens to increase their liquidity and gains. I want to ask you the question what if I borrow tokens to influence a proposal that maybe will give me money or something? Could be an interesting thing happening once the vote is triggered on chain. Now, leave you the mic, Dylan, because I think you're better. That one.
No, I mean, it's certainly, especially as new markets are added to Karuna and Acala. I think just thinking about, I believe there was actually a proposal within the Maker ecosystem in which a separate core team to which they wanted to add their asset as a pool, essentially, to Maker. They did go out and borrow votes, and hopefully within the kind of conviction voting or coin locking that is primitive within the Substrate ecosystem, we can hope to avoid some of that. But back to Raul's more general question around kind of what we've seen and how to link the off-chain to on-chain. It's a lot of what we kind of see in the real world today, in the sense that there's sometimes a tyranny of the minority in either Discord channels or discourses or Commonwealth threads, in which the loudest voices, it could be just one person, can really sway kind of what the community perception of what's going to pass will be. And so we see this, in the real world. Democracy is shifting to the left or the right, the far left or the far right, based on a vocal minority that is very, very active in participating. And there usually is that kind of correlation with respect to the extremeness or the tone of a person's perspectives and kind of how active they might be. And so we see that in crypto today. I think what Betty brought up with respect to the kind of like the experimentation around vote locking essentially is super pertinent. I can't recall exactly how many votes have occurred on Edgeware, but in the same order of magnitude as what's been processed on Kusama already. So near 100 plus different proposals, and there really is that kind of like organic gamesmanship that kind of arises based on primitives, and we see this kind of within any parliamentary system. People just understand that kind of process. One thing I guess just to point out from Edgeware's history has been just like, since there's week-long council cycles, I don't believe this is the same within Kusama. I still believe it's a day. Polkadot, it's a longer council cycle, so a little bit more in tune with like the quote-unquote real world rather than as liquid. But there is some vote sniping that does occur based on just like the timing of these council votes. Is this person who we think is in Europe, if he's a large whale, is he going to be awake, he or she? And so that there's that gamesmanship that occurs. One kind of challenge of just carrying forward off-chain discussion or social discussion within the community to the on-chain voting scenario is really the tooling. And so that's largely what we do focus on at Commonwealth. So we've been fortunate enough to bootstrap this project just based on community from Edgeware and also via a grant from the Edgeware Treasury, and been able to export this same set of tools to the rest of the ecosystem. A few core learnings that we had is just making sure that there's literally just webhooks distributed to all the community channels for threads, comments, even on-chain events, votes, and amounts. That's super, super important. Second is just really having a calendar of events and getting an email digest so you just don't forget. Even I've missed my fair share of votes in the Edgeware ecosystem just because I didn't set an alarm or something like that. And so people who do have day jobs that are not full-time within crypto just yet, even though we hope to onboard more, it's tough to keep up with the velocity, especially as the project continues to mature. The last thing I guess I would say is I hope, and this is like a future kind of thing, is one, allowing different proposal types to be active in the sense that, okay, if it's just like a new market edition, for the example, on Akala, that's one set of proposals. And then, parameter changes could be another set of proposals. We haven't seen this as a primitive just yet, but just having those tags natively on chain, and then allowing to have kind of like position DAOs that rather than just staking to a person, I think can also bring up the voter participation. Also, delegation is still kind of a broken process in general in terms of UI and UX. So something that we're continuing to hope to fix.
Nice. Let's talk about a bit about use cases. But before we touch that point, I want to ask, what's your opinion, and to Elliot in particular as a researcher. We know that DAOs have been many times compared to nation states. We have a very famous article by Gavin Wood about how the blockchain wars are coming, and how blockchain and DAOs in particular can be considered nation states because they try to solve a very general and very big problem, which is collective coordination, right? Which is basically why nation states are born, besides other things, of course. However, there's an issue here, which is DAOs surpass the borders of nation states. And I've seen already a few questions in the Ask Question window. And I want to know, what is your perspective on what are the challenges for DAOs to pay attention to legal jurisdictions, and how can they solve this, and how can they kind of like harmonize with the real world in the legal jurisdictions in order to flourish?
Okay. Well, that's an interesting question, because one of my introduction to crypto was to actually join a company called BitNation. What BitNation was doing was what we call decentralized, borderless virtual nations, which was probably a bit too much, which is why it's where it is today. Because when we say that DAOs can replace nation states, it's something I think we would all appreciate. But if you think about it, it's not going to happen. Like nation states are going to be extremely opposed to it. And the nation states actually more than just taking decisions. It's also about rules, borders, policy, military. It's not necessarily things we can or want to manage today. I don't want to declare a war on my DAO platform, these kind of things. But that was my parenthesis. Let's go back to your question, Raul. In terms of challenges, one of them is obviously legal. I saw a podcast a month ago or so about the DAO going to court for some kind of IP, whatever, battle. When you think about it, in most jurisdictions, a DAO has a different way of being understood. You have in the US where it's going to be mostly a cooperation of many people. But then, if I take your DAO to court, like, do I have to go to court with like every 1,000 participants, in India, in Russia, in Asia, in the Bahamas, it's not going to happen. We've seen a few use cases and a few nation states actually in jurisdiction opening their doors to DAOs. We have Wyoming with the DAO LLCs. We have, I believe, in Switzerland, there are a few ways to incorporate DAOs. When we talk to lawyers, long discussion, we were able to figure out that maybe there's a way to incorporate the DAO in Estonia, which is, so much advanced as a jurisdiction. But then again, does it mean that all my DAO participants become shareholders of my company? What laws do we have to support? Do we have to sign agreements? All those kind of things. It seems like, from my point of view, it seems like the way forward currently is to kind of try and separate both entities. If we think of a DAO trying to incorporate, in, let's say, the US, it seems like some people are making an entity that is controlled by the DAO, but that is not the DAO. You know what I mean? As in, the DAO will probably tell the entity what to do, and then there's a few persons that actually execute that manually. But then we go into the question of, how do I ensure execution? How do I ensure off-chain execution? What if my DAO votes for paying the salary in fiat of somebody, let's say? How can I make sure it was done, to the correct amount? Yes, there are transparency tools, but it's still a human, triggering the buttons. And that's something we still need to figure out. I think it's not yet there. I've talked to a few of my lawyer friends. I'm not a lawyer, so I should make a t-shirt for it. But their feedback was that the DAO LLCs in Wyoming, which is probably the most recent, so I can expect the most advanced, let's say, it's just not yet there. There are a few things you cannot do. There's a few things you can do. It's still very lawyerish. You probably need to hire lawyers to think about it. So it's going to, it's going to take some time to achieve that kind of stance. But I think the main, challenges will be, how do I interact with the real world? I have crypto, that's fine. I can do DeFi. I can own NFTs. I can participate in other DAOs. But, can I buy a car? Can I get offices for my DAO employees? Those kind of things.
Betty, Dylan, regarding use cases in the Polkadot and the Kusama ecosystem, in your particular projects, what can you tell us about this? What are the most interesting use cases you've seen, particularly in your project, Betty?
Yeah, sure. So when I think about DAO, right? So I think there are two aspects, well, at least. One is the topic that we just talked about, decision making or politics of it. But there's also the other side, is the economic sovereignty of it. Basically, a digital organization or any form of organization is both organizing resources as well as organizing people who have an interest in these resources and deploy them through this digital organization, which is what we usually call agency. So I think we are evolving into, well, I would like to call it as DAO 3.0. Using the framework that we are, and then the thinking that we are at is both obtaining decision-making sovereignty through what we just discussed, but also economic sovereignty. And that part is, well, I think from Akala about 2 and 3 years ago. Like we wrote the white paper on this particular topic, and it's pretty cool that it finally come into fruition. That when we go live, this economic sovereignty is starting to be built up. So on our DAO, on Acala, not only we have a governance process, vote on certain issues and aspects and changes, etc. There's also a on-chain treasury. And that treasury is also not traditional in a sense that it just holds your own token. It actually holds foreign tokens that give you utility, access, or certain aspect of value creation that for the benefit of the entire DAO, if you like, or everybody included in that DAO. And then with that, that might be something simple to say, but if you think about it, it actually gives the DAO life, right? Your DAO comes to life, because if the DAO has no resources, you basically have empty discussions, right? Now the DAO start to have resources. Those are tokens that give you access to certain things. Very, very, very immediate example is on Acala. The Acala treasury holds DOT tokens for a number of reasons. The first prominent reason is, I usually look at the blockchain and the core team relation with the blockchain is almost like having a children. You're concerned of its survivability and then whether it can actually sustain itself. So within the Polkadot ecosystem, obviously you need to obtain a parachain slot, and then how you'll be able to do it ongoingly. And then in Acala, our token model is a fixed supply. So basically similar to the Bitcoin's token economics, there's only a certain amount of token ever gonna be there, and then there's basically limited resources. And how can we actually sustain ourselves through this process of parachain auction? So with our on-chain treasury that holds DOT essentially to start with, that will actually give us a certain access, even though it's not entirely going to be enough for us to obtain a slot, but we can use that as a bootstrapper plus our community to crowdfund together to help us to obtain a slot. And then ongoingly, the protocol also continue to survive, sustain, generate more resources, and then this can actually continue to as a long-term funding into the DAO itself. And the second point to that is we are a DeFi chain. Liquidity is everything. So within that treasury, that can also be deployed for market making, liquidity provision, for the benefit for the whole network to to kind of grow from that point on. So I think, we're entering the age of DAO 3.0. Not only for decision making, kind of enforceable decision making on chain, but also be able to deploy resources, and also holding tokens of other blockchains potentially in projects. So we will start to see, this is a little bit like maybe two public listed companies that you're holding shares of each other, that you basically have this type of strategic partnership that you get access to the other project or blockchains resources or utility, right? That it's essential to our operation. I think DOT is only going to be the first that is in the treasury, and then there will be other project tokens that we will hold, so that we can continue this incentive aligned way to continue to move forward. Yeah, so that's us.
Dylan, I'm sure you have a lot of insights here as well, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief because I know we're running up on the hour, and it's been a really awesome conversation that I think we've all had. So for Edgeware, a lot of the things that Betty had mentioned, I think were it makes sense. It's been in discussion in the Edgeware channel for some time. It's of course very different use case and mentality, and so Edgeware has been really focused around kind of like helping start and incubate new projects, as well as being able to host on a native smart contract platform. And so in terms of token holding on the treasury side, that is one shared thing. And instead, it's around helping seed a new project with a grant or some type of token swap, I guess would be the more applicable metaphor in this case. and then helping participate and govern in these projects. So I think there's going to be, since these projects are still to come to kind of like the general public, but there are a few just to name some. So there's PicoSwap, which is just like Uniswap, and there will be some type of token swap that will occur for that. D-Trade is another project, and these don't have to be projects that just build on top of Edgeware. They can be a parachain, they can build on other ecosystems, and that's really what it's for. Third will be the kind of like Kusama parachain, essentially. So Edgeware, the community has decided they still want to remain a solo chain, at least at this point in time. And so the community is also still wants to participate in the Kusama ecosystem. And so the Edgeware agency is actually helping to lead a new chain to bond to Kusama as a parachain. I think we'll likely see the same thing for Polkadot as well. What else? There's a crypto social focused chain. And so a lot of the conversations, a lot of the same kind of like things that have been discussed have been around kind of like helping fund, create new founders, new project leaders to and continue to have a stake with them in the treasury and community in general. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Okay, so we have only a few minutes for community questions, but there are some interesting ones. I want to start with one by Eric. He says, how can DAOs deal with disagreements or contested inputs among DAO members? Who wants to jump in?
I can, if you want.
Go for it.
Obviously, the first one will be that disagreements are handled by votes, and technically, the vote should be definitive and settle the matter. But then, we can also look at more complex DAOs. Some of them will be on the Aragon side, actually, where Aragon has that concept of an Aragon court. And if somebody feels like something should not have happened with the DAO, they can take it to court. Involve some tokens and stuff like that. But then it involves also jury and randomly selected judges that could settle the matter on whether somebody misbehaved, whether the DAO misbehaved, whether just something that should be discarded. I think that will be one solution to handle that kind of cases. Mm-hmm. So the other one could be to just make a new vote, but at this point, we just end up in some kind of loop where everybody's going to disagree.
Indeed. Betty, Dylan, do you want to add anything else?
No, not actually.
Betty, you're good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Cool.
Concerning on time. Yeah.
We talked a lot about the tyranny of the minority, right? But there is a question here about the tyranny of the majority. Is there a way within a DAO project to protect against the tyranny of the majority?
Yeah, I like this question a lot. So I guess there's multiple ways in which we've talked about tyranny of the minority, and that's been first just on loud and influential voices. So people who are spending their time and well spent effort on creating informed arguments, essentially, and advocating for their position and how that sways things. Second way it comes across is with the token weighting. Luckily there's a balance for that, and that's allowing you to lock your tokens for increasingly large amounts of time, so that you can have a larger stake within the vote. Anytime, anywhere from 0.1 to 6x if you don't lock or lock for 6x the voting period, I believe. I guess the quadratic voting is still my favorite implementation. It's still really tough to roll out because you need a Sybil resistant I guess like identity standard, so that you can tie someone's identity. Doesn't have to be a social security number, but something to an address, and then it'll weight your coins kind of like accordingly. It's tough to roll out, and so the most popular kind of like project that starts to roll this out has been Gitcoin, and it's just to note that even their governance yet they still use normal kind of like comp Bravo essentially, so just coin weighted voting with delegation. So it's a tough solution, but basically it allows you to go from one person, one vote. You take the square root of whatever coins are at your address, and so the large stakeholders are not drowned out, but get increasingly less stake, and so you can have this kind of like majority of smaller voters and holders, and it's mathematically optimal essentially.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry, there you go. Anything else to add to Dylan's comment?
Great answer.
We have time for one more question. We talked and discussed this a bit in the hour, but there's one question that has a lot of votes, and so I need to ask it. How will traditional governments, so centralized powers, interact with DAOs? We've seen some examples, the minority, of course, especially in US states. But how do you think, how do you envision the future of countries interacting with DAOs? You want to start, Elliot?
If no one else wants to take it, I'm all up for it. Yeah. Well, I guess I would see two main ways for it, two main realistic way for that to happen. The first one would be that since DAOs have offers resources, as Betty, you went over in the previous reply, a DAO, could be seen, for instance, supporting the elections of somebody. Or I think, in the US, one of the candidates was actually, pro-crypto. What if, DAOs decide to send crypto, do events? They could do it. They have full resources they can engage with. The other, I would say, solution, I don't think we are yet at a point where DAOs can have like government contracts, right? But if we were to solve the DAO incorporation issue, or at least, have a physical entity, could imagine that DAOs actually, work with governments through their legal entity. The other one would be that, so governments are sometimes more or less open and can also just work directly with communities. We can have political members join, DAO forums and, just get involved, I think, regarding like actual involvement, contractualized involvement, I think we're not yet there.
Perfect.
Anything else to add, Dylan, Betty?
I'll just say my last words is like, I don't think any of this is will be innovated in a technological isolation. It's not that we just design a system and then it will just work perfectly. If that day comes, AI probably takes over the DAO and then we're no longer useful as humans. But before that day comes, I think even blockchain itself, like decentralization, and then having everyone have the ability to participate and then deploying resources, making decisions, is an evolution of how we organize as human societies, right? And then that takes a lot because previously, we probably fed those decision-making results rather than being part of that process. You cannot just expect everyone all of a sudden turn into a decision-making expert. It takes a process. And from both sides, from the side of people who used to make all the decisions, also to the other side of people who usually just take the results, right? Now somewhere we have to meet in the middle, that everyone can be, participate and have a balanced decision making. So just in more general, I think for any of those, talking about regulators, governments, they are also people. Some of them may live next door to you. They go to the same shops as us. To buy grocery. So I think it is not quite, them and us, the current system and our system. I think it's more of this process of how we actually evolve, how we actually align our thinking and how we actually educate and also bring more people into the space for this type of discussion. What is better, for all of us? If there's more this open data, because we can see even regulators, there are folks supporting crypto, there are folks against crypto. You can see a lot of those discussions. Some are not ill-informed, but a lot of them are very well-informed because they start to learn, what crypto actually means beyond just a token symbol, right? There's a lot of meaning and community behind it. So I think those are very, very meaningful. It takes a lot of work that are untold, right? Because that actually individuals have to make the effort to have that conversation, putting in effort, even lobbying groups and things like that. So I think It's a long way to go, but I'm trusting the humanity here, everyone doing their bit for education, spread words, and also just experiment and see the results. So that's me.
Perfect. Yeah, Dylan, go ahead.
Just a few last words. I mean, totally agree. I think we're all here for the long haul, and right now we're iterating on social technology. Like we've talked about, nation states have been around for a long time, and so really about the themes of education that we've talked about, not just within our own ecosystems, but more broadly. I'm a big fan of DAOs, and so as they continue to blur the line between work and play, and all these different types of interactions that we have, I'm going to be excited for all the things that continue to come.
Great. Okay, so I mean, I couldn't have closed it in a better way. I want to thank you, all of you. Thank you, Betty. We know it's late. Thank you, Elliot and Dylan, for joining as well. I hope I can host a second discussion on this pretty soon. Hope to see you all soon. And thank you to the community, and thank you for everyone to join, and great questions. And the discussion was fantastic. And go vote on your DAO, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us. Good night, good day, good afternoon.
Yeah.